Yo, Dev. Update at number 8. As opposed to last week when I had come out of the hernia operation, they put me on opiates, and I only took them for a couple of days and then stopped because that must be the idea. Yeah, they were bloody awful, man. I always thought that they talk about opiates in general, how addictive they are, and I thought, well, they must make you feel fantastic, but man, I just felt dumb and constipated and sick, and the pain didn't really change, so I stopped. And after 4 days of constipation, I ended up passing what can only be described as an axe handle, and then I was all right again. But yeah, that was a heck of a thing, man. Anyway, I'm back, and in light of what I've been talking about with these updates as to what the creative process is, that phrase is going to be beat to death by the time this whole album cycle is finished. But I had mentioned how things start to coagulate into some sort of identity the longer you go. It's you start to get reoccurring themes or thoughts or ideas that then you can put into a place of continuity, and then as a result of that, an album starts appearing, or a project starts appearing. And what happened over the past week is, I think, the breakthrough that I was looking for. Part of that came from the fact that I've been overanalyzing it. The last record I did with Lightwork, I worked with a team of people, and the process was completely different than anything I've done, where so much of it is analyzed, like whether or not you get to the chorus quick enough, or the structure of it, or what the form or the format, and it was a struggle for me that I ended up, as expected, sort of rebelling against at the time. But I think I internalized a lot of that thinking, and I started thinking more about how, while I was writing this, I'm like, well, what is the theme? What's the story? What's the aesthetic? What's the font? And what I started finding was that in the construction of what I've been putting together for the studio and for the Atmos rig and everything, which I'll talk about in a minute because, fuck, that is amazing. I realized that I was enjoying the manual labor more than the writing, and I was like, well, how's this happening? I'm in this environment that I've created for myself that's ideal for me to do my work, and all the years of determining what is the most efficient workflow for me and setting it up so it's ergonomically tactile enough for me just to like create quickly. Yet I just preferred mowing the lawn or digging ditches or something. And I think it's because what I started thinking this week was, I think I've just been overanalyzing it. And I was writing a piece of music that I had determined in my mind was going to be part of the Moth. And I was just like, man, I'm so sick of this. It's like work. I'm thinking about it too much. I'm thinking about what the aesthetic would be, and all blah, 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 as I've been discussing. And so I put it aside, and I was frustrated because, the surgery was kind of starting to level out a little bit in terms of the bleariness. And I didn't want to go to sleep yet, and I thought, okay, well, just put on this other thing that you've been working on that you do really enjoy. But I've been working on it passively only because I think, well, it's too... I guess the only thought I had was it's too weird, or it's too abstract, or whatever. And when I was working on it, what really struck me was how much I loved it. I'm like, oh yeah, I love doing this. And the first thought I was like, yeah, but you can't do that. You can't do that because it's too this and that and the other thing. And I started thinking, well, I wonder how much of my trip has the baggage of the past attached to it. Like I've got an image of who I am, I've got an image of what it is that I do or what it is that I represent, or maybe in the past there was something that I've done that had like a modicum of success, and therefore sort of subconsciously you internalize that, and it affects it on this level that I wasn't aware of. I think I was looking at the writing that I've been doing through the lens of what I thought people wanted or who I thought I was, as opposed to where I actually am. You know, while I was away, I had the chance to listen to old strapping material, and I loved it. You know, I loved that stuff. And there was a part of me that was like, well, man, wouldn't it be cool if you could summon that type of passion and that type of ferocity? And I ended up thinking, no, of course it wouldn't be cool. It's great for me to appreciate it because it was so who I was back then, but that's not who I am now. So trying to be something that you're not is crazy. But I think that comes hand in hand with thinking, well, people aren't going to like who you are. If you just allow yourself to be who you are, there's no way people are going to like it. But I look around, I'm like, well, I got friends, I've got people who care about me, I got, you know, people in my life that, and I like myself, and I like how my brain works, and I like how all these things are organized. And this piece of music that I had originally wrote off as being untenable became very inspiring. And then it kind of snowballed into a couple of things, two things. One is Atmos. So I set my workspace up with Atmos, and if you're not familiar with it, it's immersive audio. So basically I've got 9.1.4, so it's 5 speakers across the front, 4 on the roof, 2 on the side, 2 on the back, and a sub. And with the panner in Pro Tools and Logic, I've been learning Logic as well, and that's an awesome program. You can basically, once you get the calibration right and you get the EQ and the time alignment right, you can situate any piece of sound kind of in a form of 3D space. So as opposed to looking at the music in a two-dimensional sense, which is what stereo kind of strikes me as now in a sense, this is like you're in it. You're not looking at it, you're in it. And I thought that prior to listening to Atmos, it was going to be a real profound revelation, like it's going to be a freak show and everything's going to be really, whoa, this is crazy. But when I first started listening to it, I was like, oh, actually this is just what it should sound like. This is what music should sound like. And the great thing about Atmos as I'm learning it is the file format, the ADM format. I'm recording in Atmos, so I'm not recording in stereo and then mixing it in Atmos. I'm recording in Atmos, which it presents some logistical problems, but they're not. You can sort them out. And then by doing that, the ADM file then down mixes. It's got an algorithm that you can essentially, if you mix it in Atmos and then you deliver that to whichever streaming service, Apple or Tidal or what have you, not only is the Atmos and the lossless present in that file, but it also down mixes to stereo and 5.1 and 7.1. And while you're mixing and while you're working, you can toggle between that and binaural and the headphones, and you can kind of fine-tune your presets. So just by taste, you can listen to the stereo mix after participating in Atmos and say, okay, well, those back speakers aren't as present in the stereo field as I thought, so you can attenuate them or bring them up or bring them down, and just a taste. And then I'm finding that because of the headroom in Atmos, and because of the lack of a global master bus, there's no master compression really, there's no master EQ, and because of the amount of space, you don't have to treat things in the same way that you did. So as opposed to having to slam a kick drum and a snare and You have to, do a side chain on the kick and the bass in order to carve room in the kick so the bass can speak, and in the snare you have to print it 6 dB louder and then crush it with a bus compressor so it still has the impact. But all these tricks that for years of mixing I've internalized as being, well, that's just what you do. And it becomes this weird sort of perverted science that's interesting for sure, but it's not intuitive. But by doing an Atmos and the lack of master bus in the headroom, you're just kind of doing each instrument on its own and then finding how it can participate with each other in this sort of wide open space. And then when you listen to your down mix, your mix in stereo that you'd be presenting as, well, here's the stereo version of this work I've been doing, is devoid of that compression, EQ, all that sort of stuff. And as a result, my stereo mix, all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that sounds great. It sounds really big. I think a lot of, when I first started getting into the whole Atmos thing, it seems so confusing. Pro Tools just released a new update that has the renderer built in. Logic has had it in there for a while. And in the past, you'd have to run these two programs simultaneously. You'd have to have your DAW and then your renderer. But now that they're integrated, I go back and forth just in my I/O setup. I just go between 714 and stereo. And it's, knock on wood, it's effortless. But when we first started, when I was working in 5.1, and I was even jazzed on that at the time, where it's like a sub, center, and then the rear, they had the LFE, the low frequency effect, that you had a fader on each one of your pan sends that you would send low frequency information to the sub. And in my experience with the 5.1 mixing, that's how you got the low end, right? Like if you had a kick drum, you would add a bit of that LFE, and then that's what would come out of the sub past a certain threshold. But when Atmos came in, there was all this talk prior to me setting it up of people saying, well, the LFE, you're going to get phase cancellation when it goes in between the other low end that's being distributed to the other speakers, because with some of the interfaces you can do bass management, but a lot of it's just wide open, so you're full frequency spectrum in everything. And then if you start adding LFE, then your bass and your low end is out of phase because it's essentially happening in two places. But I've heard that certain binaural processes, whether or not it's the Apple one or the Sony one, they don't even include LFE in their algorithm. So it was suggested to me to do all my work without LFE, so you don't use channel 4. And I thought, well, where's your low end going to go? But because everything's full range, man, you can get all, it's awesome. And the other thing that I had heard was like, well, you can't get the same punch out of Atmos as you can from stereo. But a lot of the things that I've heard that maybe have that critique levied at it are songs that were mixed in stereo and recorded in stereo. And so it just sounds like this separated piece of work that doesn't have the same impact because how it was recorded was not with that in mind. But if you view your front speakers as essentially just a nice stereo field, and then mix it without the LFE so it's slamming in the front, and then use the other speakers, not just for effect, but just to kind of give it that depth. So for example, if you're mixing your drums, you can put your kick and snare in the middle, put your hi-hat maybe a little, but it's almost like you visualize it, like when you're looking at a kit, where would you put it in space? Okay, so maybe the toms are there and the snares there, depending on your perspective audience or musician, and then your kick is there, your hi-hat's there, and then your cymbals are there, but they're a little further away. So you can use the panning to kind of replicate that type of real-world drum imaging. And man, is it ever cool. And you can get that low end and everything just by mixing it like it's like an exaggerated stereo. And then all the other stuff, you could even on an auxiliary put a cool reverb and have that just in the back, and then you can take your rooms, your drum rooms, and move them a little further back, and your cymbals, you can maybe move them a little bit to the side. But don't go crazy with it. Keep the bass in the middle. Guitars, you could just do it like left, right. Like, don't go crazy with the band, and then you can really make it like kick. And then with all the synths and orchestras and effects and all these things that I typically do, man, there's so much real estate for that. But the band is still pumping, and it's creatively just amazing. Amazing. And there's talk of people saying, well, is Atmos going to go? And is it, are we being forced into this paradigm of thinking about Atmos, and there's companies that benefit from it? Yeah, of course, Dolby and Avid and all these companies, of course they benefit from it. But the potential for it is fucking amazing. It's fucking amazing. And I think a lot of the reason why there's been people sort of on the fence about it is when I go online trying to find things to listen to in Atmos, there's nothing. And the ones that are mixed well are like, Doja Cat or something, and it's not my type of music, so I lose interest in it really quick. And the other things are reimaginings of songs that I'm familiar with in stereo, and in that way it just sounds super weird to me. But if you start from scratch and mix it and record it and write it, it becomes this sonic playground that moves slower, because the amount of time and the amount of awareness that you have of the fidelity is so much more that you can't just kind of like phone it in. You can't just leave things without the crossfades on or what have you. I think Post Malone had recorded a record from the ground up in Atmos as well. And those are the ways in which this becomes amazing. And binaural audio is also amazing. So I've got my headphones set up in here, so when I'm working I can reference binaural as well. And binaural, I haven't looked too far into it, but I'm reasonably assured that you can get the binaural effect in almost any type of consumer headphone. I may be wrong about that. You can't do the head tracking. I know the Apple stuff does head tracking, but I think you can just use, I'm using my Sennheiser, the same ones I've used for years in the studio, and I'm managing to do that through listening to Pro Tools. You can do it at the same time as sending it to the other ones, which is also fantastic. I know Apple Music has Atmos, lossless, and all these things sort of, if the record was recorded in it, it's present. And if you have your phone set to always play back spatial audio, you can experience that too. And it's like, now that I've been working it, I'm like, wow, I'd never want to not work like this. It's astounding. So yeah, there's companies that benefit from it, but the more it becomes easier for consumers to digest without having to add anything, if all you have to do is just flick a button and then it enables it with whatever your current hardware is, or if you've got a sound bar for your computer or your TV. I've heard that how they're trying to replicate 17 speakers or whatever it is that you have in a room in a studio. In a consumer sense, they'll have a sound bar and then reflectors, so on the ceiling or on the walls. And it's not like this quantum shift of like, wow, this is like something I've never experienced before. It was really, for me, I was just like, oh, finally, yeah, this is what you should be able to do, of course. Yeah, why? Of course. So that's exciting. And then along with that, I've been starting to determine the aesthetics of what is appealing to me right now. And it's clean and minimal. It has something to do with like dry and desert and a color palette that's like gray and beige. And there's a certain font that I saw that was really, really cool. And as I've been sort of hinting towards when I've been giving these updates, there's a point in every process where all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, yeah. And then once you get fired up, whether it can just be one song, like the thing that happened to me the other day, it can just be one phrase or one visual that charts your course. And then it's like I realize, well, how much work I put into setting up this process, and how much the analysis is. It's just basically like you're spinning your wheels. It's like mental gymnastics, because it's going to evolve in the way that it's going to evolve. And perhaps part of this process was that mental gymnastic exercise, and having to work through that. Maybe that's absolutely part of it. But regardless, when I'm in the flow, you don't think. You're not analyzing it. It's clear. You're like, of course that's how it should go. And then the only impediment is fatigue. With that has come a couple other projects. So I've got this, I don't know if it's moth right now that I'm working on, but whatever it is, this desert thing that I'm working on is like, I'm loving it, man. It's worlds. Like everything is, every little bar is like a completely formed world. I love that idea. And then it's just like you're going through this technicolored precision dream that has form. It's not abstract. It's not ambient. It's form, but it's so exciting for me because it's clean. And as I mentioned on the last update, I think you get stopped in your tracks with like, how could I have not seen that this is where I'm at right now? Of course, is where I'm at. It's like you sometimes have to zoom out, stop writing, or whatever, to be able to say, oh God, yeah, all you need to do is take a breath. Get a hernia operation. I don't recommend that as a solution, but I'm grateful for it. And the other idea that I have, and it's been coming alongside of it as well, is I've got this idea for a record that is really a throwback in a sense to me. I'm not brutal metal anymore, really, but I do love the heavy. But I think that so much of what I've done for the past few years has been enamored by technology. You know, like there's tons of tracks, there's tons of choirs, there's tons of orchestras, bleeps and bloops, and 17 guitars, and 57 different musicians, which is, of course, what I'm doing now and refining, and it's fucking awesome. But there's another part of me that has started writing things. I'm like, it should just be like two big, heavy guitars with a lot of echo, big, heavy drums that are powerful, loud bass, voice, maybe a synth pad in the chorus. Keep it simple, make it heavy, make it melodic, make it melancholy. I don't want it to be, you know, happy, happy, joy, joy. I want it to be like big, monolithic, rainy, heavy metal, I guess. Hard rock, heavy metal. You know, stuff that I've been doing. The Ocean Machine, Accelerate Evolution, you know, those sorts of things. Maybe Ocean Machine more, but it's still not like that. It's more direct. And so I've been writing that too. And so I think what I'll probably end up doing is, while I'm doing these microscopic worlds that I'm just loving the whole thing, I think I'm going to whip that out too. That I'm going to get a buddy of mine and I to mix together so I can kind of stand back from it. Because when I get involved with something, I get so involved with it that it always ends up going down these like really complicated pathways, which I love. But I really would like to do something that's not that as well. And I think it would be healthy for me, as I typically have things that are coinciding with each other. One thing is heavy, one thing is quiet, one thing is complicated, one thing's not. I think because there's 5 or 6 of those songs already, I might record something in March that would come out before Moth and whatever this desert thing is, because I won't have to focus on it. I can sort of hand it off and just be like, just make the guitars rocking, the voice rocking, drums powerful, make it like slamming. So there's been that as well. Anyway, that's where I'm at. I guess it's Christmas Eve today. I've got so much going on. I got so many things that I'm working on, and I'm loving it, man. Thank you for the support. I really appreciate being able to continue these kind of updates as well, as as much as it can be gibberish for people who aren't working in this sphere, and maybe all the Atmos talk and all the stuff that I was talking about there means nothing. But it's nice to be able to voice it, because as much as perhaps the mental gymnastics were a part of this process, verbalizing it is also part of this process. So happy holidays, and I'll see you next week, and I hope your project's going well too. I am blown away by the melodrama of the artistic process. For 1 week I'm just like, oh, and the next week I'm like, yeah. This week I'm like, yeah. So, Merry Christmas. I hate that term, Merry. Happy Christmas? That doesn't make sense either. I hope you get a week off after Christmas that you can just chill into your life, because this year's been fucked for so many people, and to have no obligations for a few days is what I wish for you. I'll see you next week. Cheers.